The 1930s. In 1934, a new commissioner arrived in the Cayman Islands, Wolsey Cardinall, later to be remembered as the greatest of all the commissioners, and a man who helped lay the groundwork for the development of the islands. Cardinall oversaw the creation of many new public buildings, working with local Caymanian shipwright and architect Rael B. Bodden to create a new post office in 1939, which also housed the government departments of the Treasury and Customs. Together, they also created several new town halls across the islands, which could also be used as schools and shelters in hurricanes. Cardinall's tenure also saw the creation of the island's first hospital in 1937. Equipped with an operating theatre, dispensary, consulting room and 4 beds, it was a major advancement for a society which had traditionally suffered from a lack of health care. In addition, he worked to build several new roads around Grand Cayman, vastly improving internal communications on the islands. Cardinall successfully campaigned for the installation of a radio link, which was installed in 1935 with an additional station being opened on Cayman Brac. Not content with improving the quality of life in the islands, Cardinall used the new radios to make broadcasts to the wider world, telling his listeners about Cayman and inviting them to visit. He recognized the island's potential as a tourist destination, frequently informing people that Grand Cayman had what was probably the best bathing beach in the world, and worked hard to encourage travelers, organizing in 1937 the visit of SS Atlantis, the very first cruise ship to visit the islands. Cardinall recognized the Caymanians' deep feelings of loyalty to Britain and made the 21st of October, Trafalgar Day, the anniversary of Lord Nelson's famous sea victory at Cape Trafalgar in 1805, a national holiday. He also created the Cayman Island Yacht and Sailing Club and organized the annual Cayman Islands Regatta, held for the first time in January 1935, and which over time would encourage visitors from all over the world, including ships from the Royal Navy. The high quality of Caymanian-made boats on display at the regatta resulted in inquiries from as far away as Kenya, but unfortunately Caymanian shipbuilders received very few orders to build new vessels. When Cardinall's time in the Cayman Islands ended in 1940, hundreds of people gathered at the wharf in Georgetown to say goodbye. He departed for Kingston, where he transmitted a farewell message to the Cayman Islands. They in turn replied, saying, "Grateful for your kind message and good wishes. Thanks once again for what you did for Cayman. We shall always remember, and God bless you. Bon voyage." Cardinall went on to become colonial secretary for the Falkland Islands and was eventually awarded a knighthood for his long career of public service. The strong relationship between Caymanians and the sea is best reflected in the 1934 census, which revealed that over 50% of men between 18 and 60 were involved in seafaring. It is estimated that over 200 men were absent at sea for the census, which would have put the population at approximately 6,209, a notable increase on the 5,235 in 1921. 1934 also saw an interesting incident in which 26 Greeks were marooned on Little Cayman. These Greeks had paid the captain of a schooner for passage between Belize, now British Honduras, and Cuba. The captain had not taken enough supplies on board, and the passengers soon became underfed and dehydrated. The captain forced the passengers to disembark at Little Cayman with the threat that he would throw them overboard if they refused. The Greeks were thus marooned without food, water, or knowledge of where to go. Fortunately, they were discovered at Rocky Point by Mr. Joseph Bodden and his son, who took them to Southtown on Little Cayman. The Greeks remained on the islands for several months before they were evacuated with the assistance of the Greek government. The time that it took to resolve the situation was used as an argument for the island's need of a radio link. Better communications would have expedited the process. As a seafaring nation with a traditionally limited amount of money, it is not surprising that over time the Cayman Islands became home to master shipbuilders. Building vessels formed part of Caymanian life for over 200 years, with the first vessels being built in the 1770s. Caymanians used the local hardwoods to create the hull of the vessel. Other necessary items were imported. The planking necessary to create the decks came from the USA, whilst anchors and cables normally came from Britain. Caymanian ships were handmade with traditional tools, which meant that the process was both slow and labor-intensive, and not many vessels could be produced a year. For example, between 1905 and 1906, 8 vessels were launched. It was generally considered to be worth the wait for the high quality of workmanship. The launch of a ship was an opportunity for a major social event. On Grand Cayman, the whole island was invited. Usually, an ox was killed to provide meat, and people brought a selection of food with them, from vegetables to cakes. When the time came for the launch, everyone, men, women and children, took a rope to help pull the ship down into the sea. Whilst doing so, it was traditional to sing sea shanties. Whiskey is the life of man, whiskey, oh my Johnny being a particular favourite. The Second World War provided another illustration of the link between the Caymanian people and the sea, and allowed them to demonstrate both their nautical skill and the loyalty that they felt towards the King and Britain. As they had done in the First World War, approximately 800 Caymanian sailors served in the merchant navy, which again proved to be a hazardous undertaking. Many Caymanian merchant sailors, such as Desmond Banks of Grand Cayman and Albert Scott of Cayman Brac, died during the conflict and are commemorated on a variety of war memorials, including the Merchant Navy Memorial at Tower Hill in London. A number made their way to Britain to enlist in the Royal Navy, some mortgaging land or selling cattle in order to pay for their passage. They were inspired by the prestige and significance of the Royal Navy, as well as wishing to make an active contribution to the fight against the Axis powers, even though better wages were to be had in the merchant service. Despite people's concerns over German attacks in the Caribbean in the First World War proving to be largely unfounded, the threat was very real during the Second World War. German U-boats prowled the sea, threatening and sinking Allied shipping. In order to protect vital supplies of oil from Trinidad to Britain, the Trinidad Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve was formed. Many British colonies formed their own naval forces in order to relieve pressure on the Royal Navy. Due to a lack of Trinidadian volunteers, an application was made to the acting commissioner of the Cayman Islands, Albert C. Panton, for people to enlist. Over 200 signed up to serve when the force was formed in 1941. The first group left Grand Cayman in early May 1941 and arrived in Trinidad a little over a week afterwards. 2 more groups would go to Trinidad over the next few months, where they would train at the military base at Starbles Bay. Conditions in the camp were poor, with rain making the ground very muddy and difficult to traverse as a result. This, coupled with a lack of uniforms, the men being for the most part in their own clothing, resulted in many developing influenza or pneumonia. There was also a lack of suitable medical care, which resulted in the death of 2 Caymanians, Seaman Johnson and Eden, from pneumonia. This situation was similar to that faced by the men of the British West Indies Regiment in their journey to Britain in the Halifax or Verdeler incident during the First World War. The food was terrible, and the accommodation uncomfortable, as they had been provided with only cots in the barracks instead of proper beds. Furthermore, the men felt that the behaviour of the camp's first lieutenant towards them was unacceptable, threatening, screaming and passing sarcastic remarks. They protested to the base commander, and conditions did indeed improve. They were issued with proper bunk beds before sunset the next day. News about their poor conditions had reached the Cayman Islands, and there was a public uproar, with the commissioner being asked to intervene. Many ships were converted by the British in Bermuda for use by the Trinidad Reserve, 96% of which were at least partially crewed by Caymanian sailors. The reserve patrolled the main shipping lanes into Trinidad to make sure that they were kept open, despite the threat from U-boats. They operated some minesweepers and were called upon to rescue people from vessels that were sunk by the Germans. Their role was very similar to other British colonial naval forces and allowed the Royal Navy to be deployed in more direct conflict against the Axis powers. Caymanian waters themselves were not free from the U-boat threat, with the island's position on the shipping lanes in between Panama and Nova Scotia making them a target. This danger had a major effect on the sea-reliant Caymanian economy, bringing the turtle industry to its knees. Several ships were sunk, such as the Comayagua, which was only 14 miles southwest of Georgetown when she was attacked by U-125 on the 14th of May 1942 and struck by 2 torpedoes. Although there were accusations that U-boat crews attacked surviving crew members, on this occasion Captain Fokkers of U-125 surfaced to advise Captain Larson of the Comayagua that he was only a short distance from land. The ship's survivors were spotted by an American Navy plane, which alerted the Commissioner of the Cayman Islands, John Jones, by dropping a note down to him. Jones lost no time in sending the Timbucco, captained by Eugene Thompson, to rescue the remaining crew of the Comayagua. The U-boat threat in the Caribbean reached its zenith in 1942, and it was decided that the Cayman Islands should have their own branch of the Jamaican Home Guard, with Police Inspector Joseph Roddy Wattler, who had distinguished himself during the hurricane of 1932, appointed as the officer in charge when it was formed in the June. He was assisted by Captain Craig from the Jamaica Defence Force, in charge of 42 men. The Cayman Islands Company carried out coastal observation duties 24 hours a day, continuously watching for signs of German activity from 6 lookout posts around Grand Cayman. The Home Guard was a full-time job, with regular officers training for 8 hours a day and then standing guard around the island during the night. Despite Caymanians' reputation for being excellent sailors, one that was recognized by the British during the war, not all Caymanians who served in the conflict did so in a nautical capacity, such as Dalkeith Rule Bodden, who joined the Royal Air Force. Caymanian shipbuilding skills were also employed to aid the war effort, with 2 minesweepers, each 120 feet long, being built by Captain Ryle Bodden, an expert shipbuilder who had designed many public buildings on the islands. Caymanians who remained at home assisted the war effort by salvaging useful materials, such as scrap metal from the shipwrecks that surrounded the islands, as well as from the old cannons of the forts. These materials were made into new armaments for the war. Donations were also made of used postage stamps and shells. In addition, Caymanians made financial donations to the British Empire's war effort. These were divided amongst such causes as the Red Cross Fund, King George's Fund for Sailors, and even the Girl Guide Lifeboat Fund. Donations were also made of Caymanian goods, with green turtles being given to provide food for hospitals and ships of the Royal Navy. Caymanians were also involved with the American military campaigns. Many Caymanians sailed with the American Merchant Navy before the war and continued to do so throughout the conflict. Some also joined during the conflict, such as William Warren Connolly, who would later become an important figure in Caymanian politics and the development of the islands. In 1943, Georgetown became the site of a U.S. naval base, which housed seaplanes that were used to search for U-boats. In 1945, the U.S. Coast Guard took over the base from the Navy for the purpose of operating a shortwave relay radio station. It is worth noting that of all Allied countries to fight in the Second World War, the Cayman Islands had the highest number of servicemen per capita, amounting to 2/3 of the adult male population. This highlights the significant contribution that they made to the Allied war effort. The experience that Caymanian sailors gained during the war proved useful in the post-war period, and many Caymanian sailors that joined American shipping lines found themselves promoted to important positions as engineers and captains of supertankers and bulk carriers. The end of the Second World War did not mark the end of Caymanian service in the British Armed Forces, and servicemen from the islands have served in more recent conflicts, such as the campaign in Bosnia, the First Gulf War, and the Falklands War. Some Caymanian citizens have served in the American Armed Forces as well, reflecting the bond that the islands have developed with the United States.